Thank you very much for a very stimulating presentation. And finally, the issue of high-cost medicines that Adriana alluded to, Dr. Anita Wagner is going to focus on that in her presentation.
Thank you, Gabriela. And thank you very much. Good morning. And thank you, Veronica. Thank you very much for inviting me to share some thoughts on approaches to improving access to innovative medicines. And my hope is that I try to get us back on time, and will take like 15 minutes or so to convey three key messages. One is that, as Dennis alluded to, that pharmaceutical policy objectives are really broad and inherently competing with each other in the pharmaceutical and in the health sector. That there are multiple approaches that are being used, and that is necessary in order to seek to improve access to innovative medicines to patients who need them. Many focus on price negotiations, others focus on volume restrictions, and increasingly more focus on value. And I put that in quotation marks because different people tend to define what value means and how it is measured differently. In the long run, I think there are still very many open questions that will not go away anytime soon about equitable access and health system affordability of these medicines, and that requires, I think, information on different aspects, deliberations on what we expect the health system to actually do, and cooperation of stakeholders, as Dr. Masuda has actually alluded to. So let's quickly talk about the inherently competing pharmaceutical objectives. When we think about medicines in health systems, what we would like to have is assurance of availability of products, of high-quality generic products about which we know a lot, and of innovations that are actually worth it, innovations that are safe and effective and make a difference. And we want those medicines, the generics and the innovations, to be equitable, accessible, meaning particularly to those who need the most, which tend to be the poor and near poor. We want them appropriately used, and that is the mantra of any pharmacist in the room. It's the right drug at the right time for the right patient in the right dose. We've done that for many, many years. It becomes harder when we talk about precision medicines, which many of these innovative medicines are, because when that is the right drug to the right patient, many more variables, such as genetics of a patient's cancer, influence what is the right drug for the right patient, creating challenges in identifying these right patients. And then, of course, we want to do that at a spending level that is affordable to the patients, the households, and the system as a whole, with the goal of achieving healthier populations and satisfied patients and clinicians, and a health system and a social system, a bigger healthcare and social system that is sustainably financially in the long run. And you can easily see that if we have a very highly priced, very effective innovation that we want to fund as a system for people who can benefit from it, we may well explode the fiscal sustainability of a health system. So let's talk about some of the approaches that different entities have used in order to try to improve access to these highly priced medicines in the pharmaceutical sector. And what I have put up here is a slide that Dennis has created many years ago, trying to illustrate in a very simplified way the pharmaceutical sector. And admittedly, this leaves out bigger picture health sector, and it leaves out the bigger picture social sector. But what we have is a supply side for medicines and a demand side for medicines and a delivery system that provides medicines. On the supply side, what I'm excluding at the moment is academia and government-funded innovators of medicines. What is included in the slide here is manufacturers and importers of medicines. On the delivery side is often in many countries a smaller public sector of delivery of care, smaller because more people tend in many countries to seek care in the private sector care delivery organizations, made up of hospitals and pharmacies and clinics. And then on the demand side, we have households and patients, and increasingly with the movement towards universal health coverage, we have third-party payers. which have interactions with all of the other entities in the system, and therefore have some leverage to drive access and spending and affordability. So very quickly I will go through some of the approaches that are being used to influence the access to these medicines and trying to maintain or sort of contain a certain spending level. I won't go into all of them in detail, I'll highlight some of them. So on the government side, of course, the responsibility of the licensing entities is that medicines that are actually safe and effective come to markets, are licensed, and that biosimilars come to market so that we have some kind of competition potential created with those medicines that are on the market. Price setting is something that some countries use, not this. And then compulsory licensing has been several times alluded to, overriding patents to make medications more lower priced in a particular setting. On the supply chain side, many countries unfortunately use, or many settings unfortunately use, including here, relative markups on the price of a drug through the supply chain. Of course, that incentivizes the higher priced products to be accompanied by higher priced markups in the supply chain. If those markups were fixed, that would be one approach. Pooled procurement increases negotiation power, and many of these medicines, or these innovative medicines in health systems, are referred to as specialty medicines because they tend to be requiring special handling. They tend to require special selection of patients. Largely specialty medicines, however, is a term for a highly priced medicine, and in the United States the threshold tended to be $600 per patient per month expenditure as a cutoff for something being called a specialty medicine. So because of these special requirements around the selection of the patients, the monitoring of the patients so that the money is not wasted, they can be provided through specialty pharmacies, which then also can create a pooled procurement entity. On the delivery system side, it's of course very important that those prescribers of these usually very complex medicines are trained to do that appropriately, that they comply with the indications and guidelines for how these medicines are being used, and that they actually, because many of these medicines, at least in this country, increasingly come to market with highly limited information on their safety and effectiveness after limited trials, oftentimes after phase 2 trials. So collection of information on safety and effectiveness at the point of care is actually hugely important. Companies invest in patient access schemes, meaning they fund medicines through vouchers or direct delivery of medicines to patients directly. And the payer entities have leverage for some medicines, for some populations, to negotiate prices or to prioritize, i.e. restrict volumes, to who gets these medicines and who provides them. And then increasingly we have what's called risk-sharing agreements in Europe, called managed entry agreements or value-based contracts that are pegging the payment by the payer of the drug to either a certain volume-based price or to an outcomes-based price, and we'll talk about that briefly. So, I will use 4 examples of types of innovative medicines to illustrate some of the policies that fit into that big picture that I just showed you. The first 2 are innovative medicines that are truly breakthrough medicines that save lives. The second 2 are examples of medicines where we are not so sure about, where there is a lot of uncertainty about certainly the long-term effect and about whom they can benefit. So let's start out with what's called tyrosine kinase inhibitors. These are small molecule oral anti-cancer medicine, the first one of which has been developed in 2001. It's imatinib. Dr. Masuda, I saw you have it in your product development portfolio set of drugs. And these drugs are revolutionary. They have made the life expectancy of patients with chronic myelogenous leukemia similar to those of patients without the disease who are matched on age, gender, and other categories. So between 90 to 95%, or in 10 years out, 88 to 97% of life expectancy of a general population without CML is the life expectancy of CML patients since the advent of imatinib in 2001. Now we have several more of those tyrosine kinase inhibitors. Interestingly, imatinib came to market in 2001 at $26,000 per patient per year. In 2017, in this country, the average the listed price was $140,000 per patient per year. So we have a tremendous price increase for something that has actually been a long time on the market for one of those specialty medicines. Now let me show you what Thailand did in order to make this medicine more accessible to more patients. And this is work that has been done by Rosa Renström-Siri, one of our fellows, when she was with us several years ago. And what I want to highlight in these three slides is that this was a collaboration that employed between multiple different entities, namely the government, the industry, the insurance organizations, the three insurers in Thailand, the non-governmental organizations, and the clinicians. And so I want to drive home the point that really this is a process. You will also see that it's a long-term process that uses multiple policy instruments and engages multiple stakeholders, which I think is also something that you alluded to, Dr. Masuda. So what happened in Thailand? The drug was available in 2002, got market approval, and which is of course an engagement of the government and the company. GPAP is the Max Foundation's, the NGO's patient access program that Novartis engaged with in order to make the drug available to individual patients who are considered to be poor. They were enrolled in the largest of the three health insurance schemes in Thailand, the UC scheme, Universal Coverage Scheme. And the drug was provided for free through the GPAP program to eligible poor patients who needed it. In hospitals, the drug company engaged with individual hospitals, so these were multiple individual negotiations to reduce the list price of the drug to 50%. That affected mostly the people in the second scheme in Thailand, which is the Social Security scheme. These are the employed non-civil servant insured patients. And so then the government wanted to make effective specialty medicines or innovative medicines accessible to patients, but wanted to do that in a cautious way to not incur a sudden budget impact of these enormously high-priced medicines with a promise of we are funding, we, the payer, fund this medicine for everybody who needs it. So they announced that they would seek to find solutions to the access problem, make a commitment to fund them, not exclude them from funding, but do so over time and implement different tools to do so. So what did they do? They threatened with a compulsory license. And that threat was enough to, that threat resulted in an agreement in an agreement of the pharmaceutical company to extend this individual patient-based GPAP program to all patients with CML covered by the UC scheme for free. So without budget impact on the government insurer, this drug was, with a collaboration with the pharmaceutical industry stakeholder, provided for the UC enrollees, for the poor patients. And then the E2 access program, the promise we find ways to fund this, was implemented officially for the UC patients only. It wasn't made mandatory for the Social Security system patients because that would have resulted at the current financing in a sudden budget impact that the system may not have been able to absorb. So in the longer run, you see now we're in 2012, the government actually negotiated, rather than individual hospital-based negotiations, negotiated a 50% price reduction for patients who are enrolled in the Social Security scheme. The third scheme, just to be complete, the CSMBS at that time continued to pay fee-for-service at the price asked by the company. So you can see that there are different prices for different populations within the system. What did this do? So just very briefly, this is Rosarin's work to show how many more patients in these multiple policy interventions that are depicted here by the vertical lines has increased in an estimated tripling, essentially, of the number of patients that, if regular doses were applied, could be benefiting from these patients based on sales data. Now, let me shift to another class of drugs that was revolutionary, in that it is the direct-acting antivirals for hepatitis C. Hepatitis C being a chronic infectious disease that results is the main cause for deaths from liver disease, or the main cause for liver transplants for those patients who can get a liver transplant, for which until the end of 2013 or the beginning of 2014 we had very substandard, highly toxic treatments or interferon-based treatments that patients could not adhere to. In the end of 2013, sofosbuvir came to market, a truly revolutionary medicine, curative, in a 12-week course of this chronic, fatal infectious disease. A real breakthrough. It came to market at $1,000 a pill for $89,000 list price for a 12-week treatment. Now, chronic hepatitis C affects between 80 and 150 million people in the world, 3 to 4 million in the United States. Very different from chronic myelogenous leukemia. We now have a high-priced drug that has a high volume of needed patients, creating a sudden budget impact if it was made available by payers in systems. So, payers restricted access to this medicine despite all the benefits of it, because they were not envisioning this kind of budget impact. And so here is just one example of restrictions, and that is the United States, 50 states. The different colors show you one type of restriction. Several others were put in place to select patients with the intent to provide this drug to those who presumably would benefit most. And this is here by liver disease, by severity of liver disease. So you see that the F4, the darkest color, it requires that only patients with the highest severity of liver disease get the drug. And then you see what you may take away from this slide is that there's huge heterogeneity within the United States in this program, which is our Medicaid program for the poor, who gets access to these drugs, because different states implemented different rules questioning equitable access to these medicines, made necessary by the sudden budget impact of a high price times high volume medicine. What Medicaid cannot do is transfer costs to patients, because there are essentially no co-payments in Medicaid, because poor people would be disadvantaged by co-payments. The commercial insurers might take a policy that moves more of the payment for the drug to the patient. We have here a colleague of ours, Christine Liu, has looked at what one of the insurers in the region, Herbert Pilgrim Healthcare, has done in order to make these medicines available to patients without impacting, and you see it faintly here. This is the patient out-of-pocket payment for these drugs by month. And you see that it's essentially very low. Ever since the drugs came to market here in early 2014, patient out-of-pocket treatment for these new hepatitis medicines, the red line, has not increased by in this commercial insurer. But the spending, of course, by the commercial insurer has increased. However, it was possible for this insurer because of the fact that multiple DAAs came to market. It was possible for this insurer to negotiate a lower price and to make one of those drugs, namely this one, Carboni, the preferred drug that the insurer would reimburse, and thereby containing to some degree the cost, nevertheless spending more, but without doing so by impacting patient out-of-pocket payment of patients with hepatitis C on these drugs. Now, so these were two examples, one high volume, highly priced, one lower volume, highly priced drug, and different strategies, price negotiation, made possible through competition and several other negotiations in the Thai example. Now I'm showing you two examples of what's on the horizon. And what's actually has already come and is on the horizon with very different orders of magnitude of spending and with much higher uncertainty of effectiveness and safety. And so very much hailed as a true breakthrough in cancer care are immuno-oncologic therapies, and particularly cell therapies, CAR T therapies that have come to market last year. And so these are CAR T therapies whereby the blood T cells of the patient are collected, they are armed outside of the patient in a particular environment, in a particular facility, with receptors that then allow the back-infused cells into the patient attack the cancer. In small trials, less than 100 patients, less than a year, these two products that have been marketed last year have been tremendously effective in providing benefit for patients, particularly children with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, over and above all the treatments that these children have failed. These have been basically putting these children, at least for the short observed time, into remission, which all prior treatments did not do. So these are presumed to be highly effective treatments. They are also highly toxic treatments. They have come to market at $475,000 per patient per one-time treatment, the first one, and at $373,000 per patient per one-time treatment, the second one. That is only the drug treatment. These patients need to be hospitalized before and after their infusion. They incur, many of them incur very high toxicities, adding another $500,000, presumably, to the cost of these treatments. And and these are not just the two that we currently have, but there are 900 more. The cancer drug pipeline is the largest drug pipeline. Amongst those, immuno-oncologics have about 900 of those at different phases of development. So we're getting many more of these medicines, which at the moment treat a small population, but presumably will treat larger and larger populations. So you can imagine multiplying these types of orders of magnitude of price. No health system can afford. So the discussion shifts from what is currently happening in oncology and other areas from a pay for the drug to pay for the value of the treatment discussion. So basically the idea is much like the work, so we have an expert actually in some of this in the room. Alessandra has done lots of the work on managed entry agreements in different kinds in Europe. And so this is the presumably American termed value-based contracting in oncology in this particular case. And so the idea is that the payment is not for the drug, but the payment in this case is for the outcome. And the engagement on these two molecules that I have just shown you, at least the first one, not the second one, because the second is actually not as effective as the first one, is that the payment is made if the patient is in remission after a month. That is, of course, tricky because patients may relapse further out. So these value-based contracts, while presumed to really help us in providing access, have advantages and opportunities, but they have huge challenges. And so the advantages are that the payment happens if the outcome is achieved. It could also differentiate because many of these drugs are used for many different cancers and they have better effectiveness for some and less for others. So you could differentiate one particular molecule's price depending on the indication. Presumably you would target them to those patients who could really benefit because that is what's being paid for, and that would increase quality of care and one understands how they are really used and one manipulates how they are really used in practice. These are huge opportunities. The challenges are that one needs to measure the outcomes and there needs to be a measurement possibility of the outcome. Somebody needs to do it, somebody needs to pay for it, somebody needs to analyze the data and take responsibility for the information. And that is challenging both on a privacy, confidentiality, and on a financial basis. There's also regulatory challenges. These drugs are used in combination with other innovations and in sequence with other innovations. So if we measure the outcome, it's unclear to which drug, to which company we attribute the effect, and therefore we pay the price. So this is a challenge that will not go away because more and more these medicines are used in combinations. And of course, it's only for the labeled indications. Many of them are used for off-label indications, so those patients would not benefit from, on those insurers would not benefit from that. So it's a mechanism that is being tried at the moment for these highly uncertain, highly priced, potentially misused drugs for which we can actually measure outcomes. Whether this price, then this rebate or this value-based price then gets passed on to patients in the health system is an open question. Let me close with a couple of with the latest approval of a gene therapy, the first gene therapy in this country, the first of more to come, where a single gene has been found to be responsible for a congenital disorder that might result in blindness. The drug was approved and hailed in the community as a lower than expected price. It is this as opposed to, actually I should have mentioned that the CAR T therapies are considered to, at least the first one are considered to be priced at value with a $475,000 per patient per one-time treatment. This is a one-time treatment that is at the moment at this price not considered a value-based price. And the company is trying to implement several of the approaches that I shared with you in order to make this drug more accessible. So Sparks Therapeutic has proposed that it will do outcomes-based pricing, and it will do it for longer, namely for not only 30 to 90 days, but 30 months. If certain measures of this impaired vision do not improve in these 30 months, payment would be reduced. It tries to take out middleman pricing by not by contracting directly with the payer. This drug is administered by surgeons in a hospital, and usually hospital-based drugs incur a markup in this country, and this markup is intended to be taken out by contracting directly with the payer for the drug. And it then tries to provide patient assistance in covering some of the costs the patients need to get to specialized centers where the drug can be administered. And it proposes to CMS, our government payer organization, what we call a drug mortgage, meaning because this is a one-time treatment that presumably should have long-term effects for these children to prevent blindness, to pay now, to administer the drug now, but pay in installments over time. And if then the effect diminishes, the installment would stop. So this is a new term, at least for me, in the policy approaches. It's called a drug mortgage. So we are sort of incurring costs in the future with the potential benefits and the potential risks of something like that. I want to share with you that something that we have all been alluding to. These specialty innovative medicines are the fastest growing, highest price component of drug spending. Drug spending is the fastest growing component of health spending. Health spending is the fastest growing component of government spending. That comes at opportunity costs, meaning we cannot spend on other things, and I think that raises huge questions. And so this is an admittedly old slide of Massachusetts, which is a liberal state in the United States, showing you that a public system has increased its health care coverage, its health spending over time tremendously, while at the same time decreasing spending on all other public investments. And in the private sector, we have stagnating wages and we have increased premiums that might price people out of insurances. So I think we have, and I will not get into this slide for sake of time, I think we have a problem. We have exciting, effective and also uncertain innovative medicines which present challenges to systems. There are approaches to address these challenges. A focus on value is emerging. I think that's a different discussion on how we define this. But I do think it must be viewed in a broader societal context, and I know that some of you are doing that in Brazil and other countries. So with that, I thank you very much, and I quite caught us to where we wanted to